Hello, everybody, and welcome to Podcast Creators, a show where we get podcasting advice from real podcasters. I'm your host, Greg, creator of Indie Drop-In Network and co-host of the Fandummies podcast. Today on the show, we have Josh from Obscure History. I really think you're going to like this interview. Josh goes into detail about what it's like to be featured in the new and noteworthy section in Apple Podcasts, which I know everyone dreams about. He also talks about storytelling and retaining your listener. He also switched 3 times hosting providers, so he tells you what that experience was like. If you like the way this show looks and sounds, it's recorded on Riverside FM, so I've got an affiliate link for that. I'll put in the show notes below. I'll also put all the links for both Obscure History and all of my shows down in the description box, along with links to all the equipment that both Obscure History and Indie Drop-In and Fandummies use on a day-to-day basis. So if you want to pick up some gear, it's easy links for that. All right, let's get on with the show. Hey, Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. This is our second try. We just let our dirty laundry air right on the show. But it wasn't your fault. It was my fault.
That's okay. Sometimes these things happen. It's technology.
Yeah. But why don't we just start by telling everybody about yourself and your show?
Okay. My name is Josh. I host a show called Obscure History. Mm-hmm. Previously, it was called All the People You Should Know. But I decided to do a little bit of rebranding, and so now it's Obscure History. It's pretty fun, man. I really enjoy making it, and I've seen a lot more success with it than I ever thought that I would, and hopefully there's more to come.
Well, we're going to dive into that, but first I want to start with maybe the most fun question. How do we sound like Josh?
How do you sound like me?
Yeah, give us your equipment breakdown. Like, what do you use? Where do you host? And you have and if I remember right, you have a story for the hosting that I definitely want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. For some reason in my brain, I connected it like, how do you sound like me? Like you wanted to do an impression?
No.
And I was like, I don't know, just have various quirks in your personality. Try to sound like you know what you're doing.
Yeah, I think every podcaster has that.
Yeah, I think you have to think that people want to hear your voice.
Exactly.
Okay, so for sound, it's really simple. I don't know, like some people might not believe it if they listen to my show, but I have I have this little mic right here.
Ooh, we get to see it.
Yeah, I got that on Amazon for like $40 or so. I just record into GarageBand because I've got a MacBook, and then I throw an EQ and a compressor on my voice, and then I ship it off to Auphonic for like mastering, for like leveling. That's it. That's all I do.
Wow.
Total cost like $40, and the MacBook that I had already.
Right. So I'll have you send me over the model of that microphone, and I'll put it in the show notes. So if people, it sounds like a great mic to start off with. It sounds good. I mean, we're doing some noise suppression. You're not in a controlled environment. If I can, just look around.
Yeah, nope, not a studio for sure.
Yeah. So it looks pretty good. And what's Auphonic? What does that do?
Yeah, so it's like an AI based mastering software, I guess. It's browser based, so you just go to auphonic.com. You get 2 hours of free audio a month, where you can just upload your audio and the AI masters it for you. If you need more, it's really very affordable. Like to add, I think you can add like 6 hours at a time for $10 or something. So,
oh wow.
I've done that maybe like once or twice when I've had especially productive months. But yeah, I mean, really, it's a pretty good service, especially for those of us that either don't have the time or knowledge to like get into the nitty gritty of mastering, on our own. So I highly recommend it for any DIY podcast out there.
Yeah, sounds interesting. What about editing? Like, what do you do for editing? I've mentioned it on Twitter a couple of times, but I actually don't really edit my show
at all per se. I'm just highly neurotic. So if I don't like a take, I just redo it. So the only editing that I do is like when I push stop recording and then cut off the last, couple milliseconds and then push record again to start the next paragraph.
But your shows are like, if I remember right, they're anywhere between 20 and 30 minutes normally, aren't they?
Yeah, somewhere in there. I think the shortest is about 20. The longest is about 40. I try to keep it right at 30 if I can.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, basically I just break it down into manageable chunks, like if I've got a section that I know that I'm going to be able to read no problem, then I'll just go through 3 or 4 paragraphs in one take. But sometimes, like, because it's a history show and I'm reading, maybe quotes from people hundreds of years ago that don't speak the way that I speak.
Sure.
Those I'll usually just know to push pause, give myself a minute, and then try to get through those, on their own.
So you will take little segments and then do you stitch them together, or do you edit out like the long silences between the takes or anything like that? Or do you literally just read it, take a breath, hit record again, and then go to the next one?
Okay. So if I were going to record, if I were recording something right now, I would push record. And then I would do and in 1999, things were really strange. And then I'd push stop record. I'd trim off just the last second so you don't hear my click.
Yeah.
And then I would line up my marker right at the end of that one, push record. I give myself a 4-bar count in. So I push record and it, so like click, 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 click. And then let's go. So basically I just trim off the last second so you don't hear my click, and I just read through.
See, I think this is really important because the message really isn't that you don't edit. The message is that you break your show down into manageable sections that you can read without errors. And if you have an error, you just start over on that section. You don't plow through a 30 or 40 minute episode and then go, oh no, and then start over.
Right. And I did this for a couple of reasons. So the last 4 years I've been pursuing my bachelor's degree. I've also got 2 kids and I have a full-time job and a side gig. So my time is absolutely my most premium asset that I have. Right. And so I found that recording that way, where I'm basically bypassing traditional editing, like going back and zooming in on little chunks to get my ums out or whatever. Like, I don't have time for that. And if people do, that's totally fine. Like, whatever works for, the individual. But for me, it's like, I know that I have to get in and out in as little time as possible because I have the rest of my life waiting for me as soon as I'm done recording.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And if I remember correctly, you started on Anchor, right? You started this process, you're hitting the pause, record, you're getting through your episodes, and then you post it to Anchor. What happens after that?
So you're right. I did start hosting on Anchor, and it was good. I went from 5 listeners on my first episode, and then eventually that got up to 25, and that was really cool. And then I got featured on Apple's new and Noteworthy, and that I think eventually I was up to 75 pretty regularly, and that basically over 1 month turned into over 100,000 total downloads. And I think I've plateaued right about now at 2,000 listeners per episode, which is mind-boggling. I know that's not a huge deal compared to some of the big shows or whatever, but I was totally fine making it for free, just to whoever wanted to listen, because I like the writing part really is most of it. At heart, I'm a writer, not so much an audio engineer or a performer per se. So I was happy just writing it for fun, but then it was it turned into kind of a thing that's now I feel accountable to it, because there's so many people that actually care.
Right. So let's rewind the film a little bit here, because your current show, you say you have about 2,000 quote unquote listeners. I'm assuming that that's 2,000 downloads in roughly 30 days per episode.
Yeah, something in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think that the term downloads, you could put in air quotes maybe, because I was with Anchor, and then I switched to Redcircle because they offered like the programmatic ads, which was something I was looking for.
Sure.
And so on those services, I was at like 3,500 strong an episode after 30 days, like really consistently. And then I switched to Spreaker because I got accepted into the Prime program, which is amazing. Highly recommended for any indie podcaster out there. And then immediately, like as soon as I switched, my downloads cut almost perfectly in half. And after like weeks and weeks of tech support and trying to investigate, what had happened, basically it just comes down to the downloads being certified, because Anchor and Redcircle, to my knowledge, aren't certified, and Spreaker is. So like I use downloads loosely because like saying that I had 3,500 downloads makes my ego feel nicer, but really it was probably 2,000 plus 1,500 of static, I guess, random downloads.
Yeah, but you've since added Chartable onto Spreaker, haven't you? And then and Chartable has corroborated Spreaker's numbers. Is that true or false?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have added Chartable, and I've gone into Apple Podcast Connect because being featured on Apple's new Noteworthy is pretty advantageous in the fact that like 90% or more of my listenership is on Apple. So when I go to Podcast Connect, I mean, it's really a snapshot of almost all of my listeners.
Sure.
And checking both of those sources, it seems like the entire time I was on Anchor and Redcircle, I was still getting about the same downloads that I am currently through Spreaker. It's just for some reason, like I don't understand the tech side of it, but like, so I went back and looked, and like 1 month on Anchor, I had like 50,000 downloads.
Sure.
But I went to that same month in Apple Podcast Connect, and I had like half of that, which is, perfectly mirrors what I'm experiencing now, having switched to Spreaker, going from, 3,000 to 3,500 to 2,000. So somewhere along the lines, I'm not sure exactly how, but on those other two services, I picked up a lot of just kind of extra downloads that don't seem like they were actually happening. And then now that I'm on Spreaker, those numbers are verified and, seem like they're right in line with Podcast Connect and Spotify for podcasters.
Yeah, it's hard to really know who's more accurate when you really boil it down, but I always prefer to go with the smaller number because, it's just better to plan for the worst and hope for the best, I guess, is the way to look at it.
Right. And it feels more honest too. Like if your podcast is big enough that you're trying to solicit like sponsorships and stuff on maybe sites like Podcorn, like it feels more honest to have those smaller numbers be certified and, just say like, hey, here's what I'm working with.
Sure.
Maybe it's not as much as I want, or maybe it's not as much as my thing says that it is, but like at least this is honest, and for sure that this is what you're going to get if you invest in my show.
Yeah, so let's kind of talk about this new and noteworthy thing, because you and I have talked about this a lot, just on Twitter and back and forth, but I want to hear the story. How did you get on the new and noteworthy?
So there is this magical form. I don't know where to find it. I don't know exactly where it comes from, except for that it lives somewhere deeply hidden on Apple's website. I bookmarked it because another podcaster sent it to me on Discord, and they said, hey, I did this. I filled it out for Canada. It's totally legit. It's like an Airtable forum or whatever. And so I thought, like, what's the worst that could happen? I fill it out and then nothing happens. Like, it doesn't ask for your personal information or like anything like that, just your email and your show's information. So I figured if I'm getting, catfished or whatever, like it's a bad one.
Yeah,
they're not going to get anything from me. So I filled it out, and then I went away on vacation. I went to the middle of nowhere in the woods. I had no service. And when I came back, we're driving, and my phone started like blowing up with like new social media notifications. And I checked through, I had the Anchor app on my phone. I looked at the app, and I had gone from like, oh geez, I don't even remember the exact number, but I went from like 700 total downloads or whatever to like 5,000. And then a few miles down the road, I opened it again and it was up to like 13,000. And it just kept going like that for about a month of just like a steady incline. And then it plateaued and then it went down and then it plateaued again. So I figure the listeners that I have now are the ones that liked it enough to stick through the like hype. So
at the peak, you think you probably got about 50,000 downloads from being featured, or what do you think your total like downloads were from that?
Ooh, man.
Rough guess.
During the peak or since then?
Maybe total, like total, like how many thousands of downloads do you think you can attribute to that program?
Oh,
the new
gosh.
Noteworthy.
So I had less than 1,000 before I got featured total. I think I was probably at like 700 or so. And I just recently passed 350,000 total downloads. I mean, again, total downloads, whatever that actually means. But that's the milestone that I celebrated, so I'll count it that way. But
I think that's amazing. So what do you think your highest performing episode, how many downloads it received? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out like where the peak was versus where we are now, and kind of what percentage stuck around.
I forget which episode. Like, I don't remember the title, but I had one episode hit 14,000 total.
Yeah.
And again, it was probably really half of that of actual downloads. So probably 7,000 total at like the absolute peak. And then that has since tapered off to about 2,000. And a lot of that, I think, actually this is, I think, probably good to get into, especially for independent podcasters. This is going to be kind of brutal. So like, I'm sorry that if this like crushes anybody's hopes and dreams. But a lot of that was like my own fault. Like when my show got featured, it wasn't ready to be featured. It was like not a great product. I mean, it was maybe better than some small podcasts, but like compared to what I'm doing now, it's like night and day difference. Also, I made the mistake of like, I hope that this isn't controversial, but like I made the mistake of thinking that the new listeners that had just started trying my show wanted to know what I thought about stuff in the world that wasn't related to the show. If that makes sense. So like I talked about like my political beliefs one week and lost a ton of downloads the next episode. And then I talked about my religious beliefs and then lost a ton of downloads. And, you know, frankly, people care about like what celebrities have to say about the rest of the world, but there's maybe 5 people that listen to my podcast that actually care about what I think is going on with religion and politics. So I've since restructured my show that it is like from the top to the very end. It is like pure storytelling focused on the actual plot of the episode. And at the end, I give just a few little blurbs about the show, you know, drop all of the links, all of that stuff. I do a little bit of housekeeping at the very end, but for the last, 3 or 4 months, I've been focusing just from like beginning to end, telling a cognitive story, and then, putting just a little bit of information at the end. And I can't say that my podcast is like, grown in terms of downloads, but like in terms of engagement and people caring about it, like I get so many more positive messages now that I've structured it that way. And that's a large part due to you. That was some advice that you gave me that I took seriously. So definitely I owe you some thanks there.
Hey man, I've driven down that road. So that's what I hope we can do for someone else that's watching this. I mean, there's 2 things that I learned the hard way that you then replicated the hard way. And that's when you start talking about yourself too much and it interrupts the story. It doesn't matter if it's politics or religion or if it's like what kind of baseball, you prefer over another kind of baseball. It pulls people out of the story and they get irritated, quite frankly, even if they agree with you. So it's not so much that it's a personal attack against the podcaster so much as it's they're there to hear a story. And I think once you get through the story, you've earned the license to kind of say what you want at the end. And that works for me. and I think it works for you. So maybe it'll work for other people.
Totally. Yeah. And I don't mean to say like nobody was malicious when I did. I haven't really received any like really negative or hateful reviews over anything.
Yeah.
It was just like
they don't come back.
Yeah, they just don't come back. That's they speak with their time. And
exactly.
when you notice that difference, it's like, oh, maybe I'm doing things that are turning people off. Because at the end of the day, like whether your show is 4 buddies around a table cracking jokes or a single person narrated history show, at the end of the day, people are listening because they want to hear a story.
Right.
I mean, that's pretty much it. They want to hear a story. They want to see patterns. They want structured sort of segments. And, the more that you can provide that, the more incentive there is to return. Because if it's just 4 guys talking around a table and cracking jokes and they're all like out of left field and there's no narrative and it's just a bunch of laughter, like that's maybe fine for some people. But for most people, they want to hear you have, I think that my brother and me is a good example. Like they crack a lot of jokes and they have a lot of side conversation, but like there's a theme and there's a direction. And no matter how far off of the theme they get, they always go back to like, here's a segment that we're going to talk about. Here's a bunch of jokes. Here's a segment. There's a bunch of jokes. Like, no matter what your podcast is, it needs structure and storytelling for sure.
That's exactly right. And my brother and me is a prime example of how you can take that show and build segments to keep the audience retention high. So you can constantly say, hey, we're going to play a game in the next segment. Hey, we're going to talk to this person in the next segment. And people go, ooh, and they look forward to it. For your show, your story keeps them engaged. So your quality of writing is the only tool that you have to kind of keep them there. Now, have you seen your retention do anything? Like, have you noticed anything?
Yeah, actually, that's a good thing to bring up. I had forgot that we talked about that before, but since I started focusing mostly on storytelling and putting all of the like side information at the very end of the episode, my retention went from like off the top of my head, it was in like the 60% of people that were making it through 60% of the episode to like. Now I'm over 80%. Like it seems like most people now are tuning in until I get to the part where I, do some housekeeping and tell people to go look at the links in my show notes or whatever.
Yeah. And the reason people hang up there is there's 2 reasons. One, they know you and they don't need to hear your links anymore. Or 2, they're on the other side of the spectrum and they're like a elite fan and they're sticking around. Right. So you give people the choice, whether or not they want to stay or go, and you don't hold the story hostage, which I think is really the only thing to do. I mean, you have to either do it up front or at the end. You can't do it in the middle. You just cannot do it.
Yeah. I think that's great advice for all of us. I think you're totally right on with that. And I found that like, one of the things that I do just for my show, because A, I think it fits thematically, and B, because it's something else that I'm really interested in, is I put like very obscure indie musicians at the end of my show. Right. And you can kind of tell who the like diehard listeners are because I'll get social media messages from them like, hey, who was that person that you played on this episode? Sometimes like they'll sneak in stuff like that. So it's like, I know that you're one of the ones that sticks around for the whole thing. Yeah. It's kind of a nice way to gauge it,
And the funny thing is you just don't need that many. I've heard different, those hustle economy folks, those people say, you only really need 100 true fans to turn it into a job. Right. Because 100 will tell more and the word of mouth will follow. And really, your first 100 people is your goal. So one other thing I wanted to touch on that I think is really important for indie creators is you decided to change your format, not just your storytelling and, keeping it to the point, but you changed, I don't want to say your genre stayed the same, but you changed your topic and your branding.
I did do that.
Yeah.
It may have been unwise, I guess, if you look at it from certain angles, but
it's your show.
I'm happy with it. And I will say, honestly, if anybody else is thinking about rebranding or restructuring the way that they do things, I haven't noticed a significant drop off. If anything, I've actually noticed more engagement from people since I've made the big rebrand, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
But before, all the people you should know was just about people. And writing biographies is really hard, especially of people that are as obscure as possible, because has always been one of the goals of my show, has been to be obscure, even when it was called All the People You Should Know.
Yeah.
And
it's about the people you don't know.
Exactly.
That's the key.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, doing biographies of people that are obscure is really difficult, because sometimes you are like, you run into these dead ends where they disappear for 5 years and there's no documentation of what they did. Sure. And one particular episode that I did that was so hard was one of my early episodes about Maud Wagner, who was like one of the first female tattoo artists in America. And she's an interesting person, and being the first female tattoo artist is really cool, but it was like there was no actual solid information to follow. There was like a couple of blurbs and some blogs, and then I had to go off of like information that I found in the obituary, the birth certificate, the death certificate, like a couple of different like address changes that I found through Publix record searches or whatever, like really, really difficult research. And I was getting kind of burnt out on trying to find people that had enough information that I could do an episode on without breaking my back over it.
Sure.
And so changing the name to Obscure History does a couple of things. So it opens it up to any kind of obscure topic, which, gives me a lot more freedom as a writer and takes a lot of pressure off. And it also, I think, opens up the door for future endeavors. Like, I would love to have some of my friends come on and make other obscure shows, right? Like obscure music or something, discovering, super obscure indie musicians, or obscure crime is one that I'm very interested in right now, because I don't want to make a true crime show. Frankly, I barely have time to make the one show that I make, but I just recently, and this is a pro tip to anybody that's making any kind of a history show, whether it's true crime or contemporary history or whatever, like, there are services where you can pay for information, and you should do it, because I just got a subscription to newspapers.com, and it has changed my entire outlook for my podcast, because I have access to stories that nobody has ever talked about on a podcast that are super obscure, but like some of those old newspapers went into some grisly details, man. So it's like, it's all right there. You just have to go find it. But unfortunately, it's like, sometimes you're going to have to pay for that information. But if you do, you're going to be the only person talking about, this bank robbery from 1901 or whatever.
I think that's a great tip. People should invest in their shows, not just in like microphones and editing software, but in how you get information. Even if you have to pay to interview, let's say, a family member of the tattoo artist, right? Like there's nothing in it for them to be on your show. So you have to, give them $50 or something.
Yeah, totally. I'm a big proponent of that. I mean, I don't bring on guests really. But I think that investing in the content of your show is maybe even more important than investing in, a lot of high end sound equipment, because
for sure.
And this is something that, like, I have a bachelor's degree in history, and we did a whole class on archives basically. And one of the things that you find about archives is like, it's exclusive information, right? If you're looking for like this one niche topic, you can find it probably in an archive, but you got to go to the archive. Information is not always free. No matter what the internet tries to tell you, like, not everything that you want to know is on the internet. So when you buy a service like newspapers.com, or if you pay for ancestry.com's like document, they've got like a package that's for like documents and military records or whatever. Like, if you pay for that kind of stuff, it's going to take your research from like a 7 to a 10. Just because you're getting stuff, A, from the source, and B, you're getting more of it. Because, like, if you're reading a blog about something, you can go to another blog, but it's going to be most likely just quoting the other blog or the Wikipedia. And unfortunately, all of the information isn't going to be on either of those sites.
Right. And you're not really adding anything on the topic. You're just collecting information into something. and telling a story. It's valuable. The story's probably valuable, but it's not as valuable as adding to the conversation.
Right. And, something it's interesting too is like, I don't really know anything about SEO, but I know like if I do a podcast tomorrow on Jeffrey Dahmer, I'll probably get a lot of people that are interested just because they want to listen to every podcast about Jeffrey Dahmer. And that's fine. Like I've listened to a couple myself and it's a pretty interesting story. But the episode that I just put out this morning is not optimized for SEO because I did an episode about a man who literally you can't find on Google. There's no pictures of. This person barely exists in the annals of history, but I found his story in a newspaper and I followed, the trail of newspapers and just kind of made an outline of this guy's life. And it turned out to be one of my favorite stories to cover because it was kind of this quirky tale of a guy that was participating in this fun little mysterious, advertisement campaign, and then I just followed his life. He was like a traveling coffee pot salesman and was a member of like various philanthropic organizations and seemed to be like really well respected and highly regarded within his little tiny part of the world. But like, literally nobody knows this guy's name except for the people that listened to my episode today.
That's awesome. I mean, it sounds like the definition of obscure history.
Absolutely. I've never been more obscure than I was on this episode, but, and I think that's like, and part of me was a little concerned, when I went to go put that episode together, because there is no SEO value in that. Like nobody's going to come search for this guy's name on their own. So this one was really just like a love letter to the people that enjoy my show, because it was like, I'm not bringing in anybody that's not already here for this one.
Yeah, but new listeners are going to find immediate value. They've never heard of them. It's the show's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The storytelling is on point. There's no ridiculous chit chat in the middle. Like,
right.
I think you're on the right track, and I would bet money that your show will just continue to grow and grow and grow and grow. And as you refine, you're going to refine your techniques. There's going to be something you're doing now that later on you can't believe that you did.
Yeah.
Just who knows what it is. But
totally. And I'm totally like a shame-based person to some degree. Like I keep my old episodes the way that they are, because sometimes when I feel like I'm a hotshot, I go back and listen to those and I realize like I am 10 months removed from being a complete dumpster fire.
It's the timetable is so short, isn't it? Like think about how long it takes you to learn something in any other vocation, but like in podcasting, it's trial by fire. You are on fire the whole time.
Absolutely. And I think, I've been tempted to re-record some of those old ones before, just because they are really bad, don't start with episode 1 of my show for sure. But then I think like, every once in a while, when I'm feeling like, like I'm hot stuff, I just go back and listen to that and think, man, a year ago, I was making garbage.
The thing to remember though is a year ago, you thought that was the hot stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the key point.
Yeah. Totally.
Awesome. Well, is there something that you're working on now? Is there anything like you haven't solved? Like if we could ask the community to go into the comments and give you some advice after you've given them a bunch of advice, what would you ask?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know exactly. I mean, I'm always down for some harsh criticism. I like to have pretty direct, correct, constructive criticism. So if anybody in the comments like sees this episode and wants to go listen to my show and wants to come back here and like lambast me for something, like I'm here for it. I'm not going to get offended.
Let's not go crazy though. Let's keep it constructive.
Yeah. No death threats. I'm fine with everything else, but
if you do that though, leave your own podcast so that we can listen to it.
Yeah. And that's something that I will do occasionally. If you're an indie podcaster and you want to reach out and have me critique your podcast, there's a pretty decent chance that I'll do it. I don't do it all the time, but I definitely try to give back to the community, because along the way there were people that like, random people off of Reddit or Twitter or whatever that listened to an episode and said, hey man, here's some things you could probably change. And then I've just made it a habit to at least give it an honest effort when somebody gives me criticism. And then it seems like it has always turned out for the better, because I think, a small percentage of people that have a negative thought about your show are actually going to talk about it. So if there's one person that says it, there's probably 20 more people that are thinking it that just aren't going to care enough to reach out and tell you to fix it.
Yeah, I completely agree. So one final question, is your show still fun? Because I see people on Twitter comment that when they get negative reviews, they don't want to change their show because it won't be fun. Is your show still fun? Because you've changed it a whole lot.
It's more fun. I have never been more excited about my show than when I pushed publish on my episode today. I was so stoked to get that stupid, tiny, insignificant story out to the world. I was like a level of nerd happy that I have never been before in my life. I think that it just gets better,
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that indie podcasters especially need to realize is that a lot of the time when people give you a negative review, it is because they want to care about it and they want you to fix the things that are bad. And that's usually all that it is. Now I will say there are some 1-star reviews that I've seen that are just disgusting and people should not use the internet that way. But if I've got a 1-star review that says too much background noise, I can't focus, that person wants to focus. They stuck it out long enough to decide that they couldn't. So if I fix that, at least that one person and the 20 other people that felt that same way, they might come back and stick it out,
I couldn't agree more. So why don't you tell everybody where to find you, where to find your show, all the details?
Yeah, totally. It's Obscure History, wherever you get podcasts. Most of my listeners are on Apple. So if you go there, leave a review and a rating, because we all know that helps in the mysterious algorithm.
At least it helps people. At least it helps people know that the show's good.
It's true. Right? Yeah. If nothing else,
it
helps people know that it's not a bad show.
Exactly.
Twitter @allthepeoplepod, because you can't change your username, and I was too lazy to make a new one. Instagram @Obscure History Podcast, because Instagram lets you change your username. Or obscurehistorypod @gmail.com for any kind of inquiries.
Perfect. And no one has to write any of that down. I'll put it all in the show notes so that you can click it and get to all of your stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you so much for being on the show, and I'm sure I'll hear you on the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much to Josh, host of Obscure History, for coming on the show and teaching us all sorts of amazing things, from what happens when you're featured on Apple's new and Noteworthy to how do you record a show without editing, but also make it sound good. We have a lot of low-cost tips, and you should definitely check out his show so you can hear the outcome. I'll put links to everything we talked about down in the show notes below. If you like this content, make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, and hit the bell so you don't miss anything. All right, we also talked to lots of other podcast creators, which you can see in the boxes above. Thanks again. Bye-bye.